Today, we will talk about the woman who discovers a diamond ring on the beach. The jeweler is stunned after the inspection. Finding the owner. She found a beautiful ring on the beach, and when she saw that something was engraved on the inside, she knew that she had to return it to its rightful owner, but she had no idea where to start looking for that person. So she took it to Mr. Dalton's jewelry store, hoping that he would be able to help her. Mr. Dalton panicked. But when Mr. Dalton saw the ring, his reaction surprised her. The old man suddenly turned pale and started stammering. "What? How? Where did you find this ring?" And when Samantha told him that she'd found it at the beach, he panicked. She had no idea what was going on. Walks on the beach. Ever since she bought a house close to the sea, Samantha took a walk on the beach nearly every day. She loved the feeling of the wind blowing through her hair, the sand underneath her feet, and the salty smell of the sea. And with each walk, she took something from the beach home with her. Things she took home. At first, she collected beautiful shells with special colors or special shapes. But after a while, she also started noticing other items in the sand. After a while, she expanded her collection with unique pebbles that caught her eye, pieces of glass, coins, and much more. An impressive collection. Sometimes, she gathered colorful seaweed pieces or parts of beach plants and flowers and pressed them together to preserve them. She even found some urchin shells, shark teeth, and crab claws. She didn't want to boast, but she thought her collection was quite impressive. But she had no idea that she was yet to come across her most special find, something shiny. During one of her many beach walks, she saw something shiny in the distance. It was a very sunny day, and the entire beach was shiny, as the sand reflected a lot of the sunlight. So at first, she thought it would just be a piece of glass or metal. Half buried in the sand, she still couldn't see what it was. It was almost completely buried under the sand. Only a small part of it was peeking out on the surface, and that small part was so reflective that she could barely even look directly at it. What could this be? Pulling it out. She bent down to take a closer look at it, and she tried taking it out of the sand. She really needed to wiggle it out of there, as it was stuck in the hard, wet sand. But soon enough, she had pulled it out there, and she held it in the sun, admiring her new treasure. She gasped. When she finally saw what it was, she gasped. How could this have ended up here in the sand? She couldn't believe it. Someone must have lost it. What was she going to do with it now? It wasn't necessarily something that she expected to add to her collection. A beautiful diamond ring. You see, the shiny object in the sand turned out to be a beautiful diamond ring. She had found many treasures on the beach, but never something like this. It looked very expensive, and deep down, she knew that she needed to do the right thing. An inscription. She would have loved to keep the ring herself, but upon taking a closer look at it, she saw that there was an inscription on the inside. Whoever it belonged to, it probably had a big sentimental value. It was only fair to try and find the rightful owner and return it to them. Looking for the owner, but where could she start? The waves were strong today, so she had no idea how long the ring had been stuck in the sand there. She wanted to find out who it belonged to, but she couldn't just go around asking strangers whether they had seen this ring or knew its owner. Taking it to a jeweler. Eventually, Samantha decided to take the ring to a jeweler downtown. The man was a professional, and he had been in the business for decades. Surely, he would be able to give her some information. Hopefully, he could tell her where the ring came from, or maybe he even knew who it belonged to. Mr. Dalton. When she walked into the shop, the jeweler, Mr. Dalton, was behind his desk. He appeared to be working on a set of earrings, but as soon as he saw Samantha come in, he put his work aside. "Ms. Thompson, always a pleasure to see you." They hadn't seen each other in a long time. They knew each other well. They knew each other pretty well. Samantha had taken some lessons from Mr. Dalton because she wanted to learn how to make jewelry with some of the things she found on the beach. With his help, she had made several necklaces, rings, and earrings with beautiful shells and rocks that she had found there. And now she needed his help again, asking him for help. However, this time it would be different. "How can I help you today?" he asked her. He was always a sweet, polite man, and he reminded Samantha of her own grandfather. She explained that she had found this ring, and she wanted to find out who it belonged to. Could you please take a look at it? He inspected the ring. Of course, darling, let me see it, he responded. She gave him the ring as he looked for his magnifying glass, and she walked around the shop, looking at all the beautiful things he had already made. A couple of minutes later, she returned to his desk, still unaware of what she was about to find out. He was shocked. When she saw Mr. Dalton, she was shocked. He had turned all pale and stared at her with wide eyes. What? How? Where did you find this ring? He asked her. She told him that she had just found it on the beach yesterday. She didn't understand why he was so shocked. A phone call. He quickly took his phone, pressed some buttons, and held it against his ear. He was silent while he waited for the other person to answer the phone. But from what Samantha could see, nobody picked up. But Mr. Dalton didn't give up, and he dialed the number again. He was panicking. This can't be real. This isn't happening, he said. Samantha still had no idea what was going on. Mr. Dalton, what is going on? She asked him. But by then, the old man was panicking, pacing up and down his office with his hands in his hair. He didn't even hear Samantha. His eyes filled with tears. As she looked at him, she noticed that his eyes were filled with tears. This must be something really serious, she thought to herself. What was going on here? She wondered if she had made a mistake. She never wanted to upset him like this. But still, she wondered, who did that ring belong to? He needed her help. Mr. Dalton gathered himself, took a deep breath, and finally calmed down enough to think. He was silent for a few seconds, and then he grabbed Samantha by the arm and looked her in the eyes. Samantha, I need your help. This is serious. You need to bring me to the police station. Right now. To the police station. Samantha just stood there and stared at him. To the police. Because of that ring. It just didn't make sense to her. But she saw that he was very serious, so she agreed to help him. He locked the shop, and they walked to her car, and then she drove to the police station as fast as she could. Many questions. She had so many questions. Did he recognize that ring? Whose was it? Who had he called? And above all, why did they need to get the police involved? But she knew that now was not the right time to ask those questions. He went inside. Possible explanations. As she waited, she thought about possible explanations for what had just happened. It still didn't make any sense to her. She had never expected to end her day at the police station, but here she was. She was lost in thought when suddenly, a noise startled her. A witness statement. One of the police officers had come to ask Samantha to give a witness statement. She had found the ring, and since that was the only thing they had to work with, it was important that they knew everything about where and how she found it. Samantha was happy to help, and she followed the officer inside. Officer Paula Hawkins. Meanwhile, Officer Paula Hawkins started her investigation. Mr. Dalton and Samantha had told her everything they knew about Jennifer and the ring, but sadly, they hadn't given her much to work with. However, she would find a way and make the best of it. She always did, imagining sharing bad news. She turned around to look at the ocean one more time, and she started her walk to the house. She imagined having to tell that poor old man that she hadn't found one single trace of his wife, and she hated it. She needed to find this woman. She suddenly saw something. About 5 minutes into her walk, she spotted something on a bench in the distance. It really looked like the dress Mrs. Dalton was wearing in the security video. Could that be her? Paula's heart started beating faster, and she started running to the bench. "Can you hear me?" When she got closer, she gasped. It was Mrs. Dalton, indeed, and she was lying on the bench, unconscious. "Oh no, oh no, oh no, Mrs. Dalton, Mrs. Dalton, wake up, please. Can you hear me?" Paula repeated over and over again, but the woman wouldn't move. Her eyes opened. Suddenly, her eyelids started to move. She slowly opened her eyes, and when she saw Paula's worried face, she asked, "Oh dear, what is going on? Are you okay? You look frightened." It took her a minute to realize what had actually happened, but when she did, Paula couldn't contain her laughter. Mrs. Dalton was fine. She had just fallen asleep. "Mrs. Dalton, I think the more important question here is, are you all right? Your husband is worried about you," Paula replied. Mrs. Dalton was surprised to hear this. She explained that she'd been out for a walk on the beach, but on the way home, she was feeling a bit tired. So, she sat down on the bench to rest for a moment, and she must have fallen asleep. The ring had fallen off. Her phone had died, so that's why she hadn't answered any calls. And the ring? She had indeed lost it at the beach. She was getting older, and she had lost some weight recently, so the ring sometimes slipped right off her finger. She wanted to go back and search for it, but not without asking her daughter for help first, offering her a ride home. But in order to reach her daughter, she first had to get home so she could use the phone. Paula chuckled as she realized that everything was fine, and she offered to bring Mrs. Dalton home, but the woman was not ready for that. "Thank you for offering, but I must decline. I need to find that ring first," she said, convincing her. Paula smiled. "Oh no, Mrs. Dalton, I insist. I think your husband really needs to see you. He's been worried sick, and he still doesn't know what happened to you. If you really want to, we can all come back to the beach tomorrow to look for your ring, even though I don't think that will be necessary." Mr. Dalton heard the doorbell. Finally, Mrs. Dalton agreed, and they walked back to Paula's car. Not much later, Mr. Dalton heard the doorbell ring. He jumped up and ran to the door to open it. He didn't know what to expect, but he had a feeling that it would be related to his wife. He just hoped it would be good news. He had been so worried. He hadn't been himself this entire day. Jennifer had never gone missing before, and she always answered his calls. And then that ring. He knew that she never ever took it off, so his mind was filled with the worst theories all day. He thought something terrible must have happened to her. "You're alive." But when he opened the door, his eyes lit up, and he exclaimed, "Jennifer, it's you. You're alive." He hugged her like he hadn't seen her in years, and the tears streamed down his face. Yes, it's me. I'm okay, Eric. Everything is fine," she said to him. They all laughed. When she explained everything that happened, they all laughed out loud. Mr. Dalton had finally calmed down, and Mrs. Dalton promised that she would never fall asleep on a bench or go out without first charging her phone again. But there was one more thing that she wanted to say. Happy ending. "But darling, I am very sorry that I lost that ring. It was my favorite, and I know how much you loved it, too," Mrs. Dalton said to her husband while looking at her ringless finger. Little did she know that he had a surprise for her. Thank you for being a part of our Did You Know journey. Hit the bell icon and subscribe to stay connected for more captivating videos.